The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Politics. Our guest this week is Pickering-Uxbridge MP Jennifer O'Connell. Welcome to the show. It's been a while since we've had the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be on again.
So much to talk about, so much going on at the federal level. I think where we want to start, though, is with the healthcare funding to the provinces, and a deal signed this week.
Yes, with Ontario this week.
With Ontario. Why is this latest agreement so important?
Well, this is really important because, as I'm sure people are aware, we announced previously approximately, or just about $200 billion over 10 years that the federal government was going to invest with provinces and territories. And then from that $200 billion, our ministers have been going across the country, meeting with each province and territory to work out specific deals with each province and territory, because the needs are not always the same. And so why it's significant, so Ontario signed this week, so did a number of other provinces, but why it's significant, because now we have a clear path forward. And then the next step, so the path forward is the specific funding and the areas of priority. And then the next step is to continue working on agreements for measurement and accountability, which is something that I heard from residents loud and clear, that if we were going to fund healthcare, that we had to put in metrics to make sure the funding was transparent.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That actually was my next question. You know, if the province is going to have to provide details on how it's spending those federal dollars, so that you know, this is federal dollars, so you should, the feds should be very comfortable with how their money's being used too. But it sounds like the residents, as you said, are saying it that loud and clear as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think after the pandemic, and there was a significant amount of money that the federal government provided to provinces and territories for COVID and through the Safe Restart Agreement. And we then realized that that money wasn't injected necessarily into healthcare or supporting the healthcare system. And I think a lot of people were quite upset about that, including myself and including the federal government. So we said, we want to be a partner at the table, but we need to ensure that at the end of the day, it's taxpayers' money. We need to ensure that this injection of funds to stabilize the healthcare system are actually going towards the healthcare system and not going to other programs or things like that. So, or we want to make sure that if we're injecting this funding, that provinces then don't pull, you know, their funding out of healthcare, because then that's not an addition to funding. So these sorts of metrics are important. And I think that level of transparency is something that all Canadians should expect.
And I mean, we're not talking chump change too. I mean, this 10-year deal with Ontario includes over $8 billion in new money. And if I'm reading this right, a one-time payment of $776 million to deal with urgent needs, especially pediatric hospitals, emergency rooms, and long wait times for surgeries, correct?
Exactly. And that's why each province and territory, the deals were specific to their needs. And obviously we've seen in Ontario, pediatric hospitals, we've seen, you know, sick kids is a perfect example where we've seen, you know, where they've had to close emergency services and things like that, or postpone surgeries. So that's a critical need here. I think we all know somebody, either personally or like a friend, that has had to go to the emergency room and wait an enormous amount of time. So in Ontario, these specific priorities were really important. And then another piece of this deal that I think people in Ontario, and again, other provinces and territories would be experiencing this, but specific supports for mental health and access to mental health services. I've heard that time and time again for Durham Region that that's an area where we desperately need access to mental health supports.
Right. Okay, let's move on. I cannot believe that it has been a whole year since the blockade in Ottawa. Can you believe it's been a year? I mean, and you were in the thick of it. You were there.
Honestly, I think since COVID and everything that continues to happen, it's been a year since the start of the invasion of the war in Ukraine. Like, time has just seemed to fly by, and the amount of things happening, but certainly the blockade and what's happened in Ottawa, we still see remnants of it. Wellington Street is still closed, and there's still lots of debate about how to move forward with things like that. So, and obviously the Emergencies Act, the commission report came out. So although it feels like it's been a year, a lot has been happening, a lot of conversations about how, Ottawa was impacted and communities across the country were impacted because of that.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned the commission ruling. The commission ruled that the federal government met the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act during last year's protest and occupation. Vindication? It must, from your perspective, the commission was only saying what you knew or what you felt.
I think the government felt pretty clear that they had met the threshold. We really took the time. I don't know if vindicated is the right word, only because I know I saw some of the meetings, I saw some of the conversations happening, the debate in the House of Commons. This is not something I think any government ever, had wanted or would want or wish on a future government. So I think these decisions to invoke the Emergencies Act for the ministers responsible, and certainly the Prime Minister at the end of the day, it's a heavy burden to bear, and you want to make sure that if you're invoking such a measure, that you are doing so with all the care and information to make sure it's done right, and that it's not done, without all of those factors being considered first and in a thoughtful way. So I think it was a heavy decision, and I think kind of that thought and care came out in the commission of why it had to be done.
But the commission also said in its ruling basically that the Ontario government had abandoned Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy protests. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we definitely saw some jurisdictional issues. Ottawa is still part of Ontario, but it sometimes feels like, Ottawa is, because it's our nation's capital and where Parliament is, that it's a federal responsibility, but there were multi-levels of jurisdiction. And, I think in hindsight, how we work together could have avoided probably a lot of the pressures and strain. And I think the residents of Ottawa were deeply let down, because anyone who was there, like I was, it was very emotionally draining and scary for a lot of people and really disruptive. So I think it's really disappointing, some of the, the not being able to get past some partisan issues and work together, and people really suffered and businesses really suffered as a result. And
the Premier and I guess the Attorney General at the time, they declined to participate or to appear before the Commission, citing, I guess, what was it, parliamentary privilege.
Right.
The Commission, in the Commission ruling, it also mentioned how disappointing that was, and it would have really shed even more light on the situation. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think as politicians, certainly, and decision makers, at the end of the day, we always are faced with making tough decisions. They're not always easy, but I think you have to give people the chance to understand why you made a decision or not made a decision. So I think I can't speak to why the Premier and the Ontario Solicitor General at the time didn't appear, and they may have reasons, but I think the public in such Canada's history probably didn't experience something like this. Certainly many generations haven't experienced something like this. And I think as public office holders, we have a responsibility to explain our decisions or the decision-making process for something of this magnitude. And I think all Canadians could have benefited from the rationale. We could have learned something from it. So I think it's a question to ask the Ontario representatives, but I think all Canadians deserve to kind of know what was going on and what was the thought process.
And as far as what was going on, it was a very difficult time for you. You've been very open about the threats that your office received. Looking back on that, was it absolute? It must have been surreal to go through that.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I think what worries me is the state of politics, in the sense where, of all stripes, by the way, because I think this happens, it's not just to me, it's politicians at every level of every political background, this kind of dehumanizing and, the way some are attacked, and I have colleagues who are attacked kind of on a regular basis in a very personal way. I think it's fair game to debate the issues, and if people disagree with me, that is politics. But the physical threats, the stress on my staff, that's what was very heavy for me. And I think for a lot of people, especially my staff working in Ottawa, their safety was really a big concern for me. And I just worry about the state of politics when people are just trying to go and do their jobs, and I have to worry about their safety. And I think we really need to look at that and think, what do we want as a country and for our democracy moving forward? It's not about one individual person or one party or anything like that, but what do we expect for our democracy moving forward?
Okay, and on that, I'm going to hold you there. We're going to take a quick break. More of our conversation with Pickering-Uxbridge MP Jennifer O'Connell after this.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Think it's okay to drive high? Think again. Drug-impaired driving is as illegal as drunk driving, and in Ontario, the penalties are the same. If police suspect you're driving under the influence of drugs of any kind, or a combination of drugs and alcohol, and you fail a roadside test, your license will be suspended immediately for up to 30 days. You'll pay a penalty of $198. And you can be charged with a criminal offense of impaired driving, the same as alcohol. Driving high is never okay.
Hey, I'm Mark Grice, the artist, and welcome to my studio. I hope you'll tune in and watch my program where I give you all the tips and tricks that you need to create successful acrylic paintings on canvas. I start out with a photograph, something like that, and turn it into a painting like that, right here on Rogers TV.
I'm Eric Marchinosa's Cinema Scene in Review. Join me for a monthly movie roundup of new releases either in theaters or available to stream. See you next time in Review.
Hey, what's good, everybody? I'm Karim Grant, a former professional football player. Do you want to know what current and former professional athletes are up to these days? Catch the Players Corner with Karim Grant exclusively on Rogers TV.
You're watching Rogers TV.
And welcome back to Talk Politics. Our guest this week is Pickering-Uxbridge MP Jennifer O'Connell. I think I want to move now from the blockade to foreign interference in elections. There's been a lot of talk about that, Jen. And, you know, CSIS reports outlining how China is targeting the Canadian politicians and business leaders. You know, we've seen balloons shot down over Canada and the U.S. What is the federal government doing to deal with this situation?
Yeah, well, when it comes to foreign interference, sadly, this is something that has been ongoing and unfortunately isn't new. I think the recent media reporting has made it definitely, you know, more people are talking about it. And overall, I think that's actually a really good thing, because Canadians need to kind of know that this is an issue that happens here too. We know around the world it happens, and there, you know, the 2016 presidential election in the US, France has had instances. There's been talks about Brexit, foreign interference. Australia and New Zealand have also been very vocal. And so I think it's important that Canadians know we're not immune to this sort of activity. I think, though, what's really important is that our national security advisors, the community, and Elections Canada, and our top public servants have determined, despite, you know, ongoing and persistent attempts, Canadians still determine the outcome of our elections. And I think that's really important, because we need to ensure that our institutions are upheld. But I think moving forward, this conversation is so relevant, because we have to make sure that we are constantly strengthening our democratic institutions so that these attempts don't in the future actually sway an election or take away the Canadians from deciding the outcome of elections. So our government's put in place a number of measures since, you know, really before the 2019 election and then following that. But I think there's still more work that we need to do.
Okay, I want to move on now to Ontario's Bill 23 and the fallout from that in an attempt to provide more affordable housing. There have been some massive changes here, which limits municipalities in their ability to get development dollars from developments in development charges. And you recently spoke before Uxbridge Council, I guess back in January, because there had been some questions as to whether municipalities who can't run a deficit can look to the federal government for help in making up any shortfall. And I just want to go over that with you and what your answer to those questions were.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about this provincial legislation. And as a former counselor, I can only imagine kind of the budgetary pressures and concerns that all municipalities are now thinking about in this. So yeah, there had been kind of talk, or I've seen some kind of communications that dealing with development charges that they could go to the federal government, and we have the National Housing Acceleration Fund. And I explained to Uxbridge Council that the National Housing Acceleration Fund is not and was never designed to be a top up for development charges or budgetary shortfall as a result of Ontario legislation. The Housing Acceleration Fund is to build housing, and to especially affordable housing for the most vulnerable in our communities. And it's meant to be a tool to incentivize that. So the Minister of Housing has been very clear that the provincial Ontario legislation, that is not going, that the Housing Acceleration Fund is not going to be used to supplement municipal budgets. And as a taxpayer in Pickering myself and in Durham Region, I think we should all be very concerned about what this legislation is going to mean, because if councils can't use development charges, which are used for big infrastructure projects a lot of the times, or big community building spaces, if we can't use it for that, it's going to be ratepayers that have to foot that bill. And it's something everybody should be very concerned about.
Okay. Moving on, let's talk about Bill C-22, Canada Disability Benefit, which is currently being debated in the Senate. First off, can you explain what Bill C-22, what its purpose is?
Yeah, C-22, I'm really excited to see it move forward. We had introduced it previously, and then it died on the order paper, and so I was happy to see it reintroduced after the 2021 election. This is this will give working age persons with disabilities it's actually creating a new fund or program for persons with disabilities to help support them. Persons with disabilities are 2 times more likely to live in poverty. And so this ability to create a new fund to support those people, I think, is really important. This is something near and dear to my heart. I think, and one of the big pieces of this is it won't replace existing programs for persons with disabilities. It's going to be in addition to. And so I'm really happy to see it be debated in the Senate, and I hope it comes back to the House soon so we can move forward on it.
So what is the procedure then? It's currently, as you mentioned, it's being debated in the Senate. It has to pass there, and then what happens? It goes back to Parliament for the final vote, but it's already gone through committee, which usually is, time consuming just from, if there are any amendments, et cetera. So we'll have to come back from the Senate, see if they submit any amendments or any proposed changes. And then we'd have to review. If it comes back unchanged, then we can, move forward. But that is a general process. And once that's approved, then we can actually start moving forward. We're working with stakeholders in the disability community on how to specifically design what this fund will be and how we can best address the financial stability for persons with disabilities. So the sooner we can get this legislation passed, we can really start moving ahead on really, I think, transformational legislation. I also want to ask you about pre-budget consultations, because the federal government is asking for, people's opinions.
Yes, every year the Minister of Finance, prior to producing the budget, asks Canadians for their input on what they think are priorities, ways to, help support communities and people, or ways that they think will help our overall economy. And it's the Finance Committee also does pre-budget hearings. I used to do those when I was a member, and they're fascinating, the ideas that come in from across the country of ways to help help our economy, help our communities. And it's really exciting when you see some of those ideas presented by Canadians, and then when you get to read it in the budget, it's actually quite exciting.
So let's talk budget 2023.ca. You're making it easy for people to give their opinions. Just log on there and people can submit their ideas, correct?
Exactly. And they go directly to the Minister of Finance, to her office, her team, and they go through them and see if there's ideas that they can implement in the upcoming budget.
Okay, we've only got about 3 minutes left. I also want to ask you about Canadian aid to the Turkey earthquake relief. The pictures coming out of Turkey and Syria, just heartbreaking.
Absolutely awful. Yeah. The government has announced $10 million in support, as well as matching funds through the Red Cross. But I think, as we've seen in other natural disasters, that we are working with partners on the ground. The UN has been instrumental in helping, because not only is this earthquake obviously devastating, and then there were 2 more following, but the civil war in Syria and the situation there, and the persons that have been fleeing and not have stable housing, there was already challenges in this region. And so this natural disaster just made those challenges even worse. And getting aid on the ground and supports it's really, really difficult. And that's why we work with like I said, the UN has been instrumental in helping make sure that aid is getting to those that need it the most. So the minister has said, and the Prime Minister has said, we're going to continue to evaluate the situation. If our partners on the ground say there's more that Canada can do and is needed, we're going to step up and be there to help to support.
Okay, we've got just about a minute and a half at that left. I just want to ask you about going forward. What are you looking forward to most in this term? What's on your to-do list?
I'm really excited. My file as Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, I'm really excited about some of our upcoming plans for, infrastructure and our national transit funding plan, our permanent public transit funding. I think maybe as a little bit of a policy wonk, I'm kind of excited to see how we're going to move forward on some of these funds. And particularly, I've been really fighting to make sure that smaller and rural communities can access this. So I'm kind of excited on a very nerdy policy type situation that those are some areas that I'm really excited to continue working on.
And looking back, just 30 seconds left, looking back on your time as an MP so far, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm proud of some of the really specific funding supports I've been able to work on locally for infrastructure in particular. But I think like the Canada Child Benefit, the new dental agreement, and as well as the childcare reduction of fees is something that our community, that is going to be an instrumental change. And I think that's something I'm extremely proud to have been part of.
Okay. Jennifer O'Connell, MP for Pickering-Uxbridge. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And to all of you, our viewers, thanks again for letting us into your homes. Until next time, I'm Debra Hutchison. Bye for now.
Call the Rogers TV Viewer Response Line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
What do I like? I like open fires, moonlit nights, chatty letters, rainy days. I like daydreaming. I love this colorful little island of ruby, emerald, and sapphire. Yet often my dark moods come. I'm possessed body and soul by this depression. They say women shouldn't write. Some days I almost give up. But I cannot contain my imagination. I made Anne real. I gave her my love of nature, my love of books, and my childhood dreams. My greatest happiness would be to climb the alpine path and write upon it a woman's humble name.
Lucy Maud Montgomery battled depression, rejection, and sexism to become known around the world for Anne of Green Gables and 19 other novels.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the tools to determine if drivers are impaired by legal or illegal drugs.